It's a big problem. It's easy to get addicted to the physiological factors, the endorphins, and also addicted to what your watch is telling you about your times. Got into running marathons about 12 years ago and realized from a body composition perspective, I did a lot better with shorter distance like 10K, 5K, and more sprint type races. My body will hold on to more body fat and less muscle the more that I'm running. If you're just exercising nonstop and under eating for too long, then you're sacrificing your muscle mass. That may be good for the numbers on the scale, but it's not good for you. And the people who I've seen succeed over time are the ones who are able to experiment, find what works for them, and then have the discipline to stick to it for the long term. Admit if things are out of whack or if something has changed, to not be afraid to also adapt that approach, but then be disciplined to that approach.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to announce we have a special guest today. We got Mr. Abel James in the house today. Abel, how are you doing this morning?
Dr. Baker, I'm doing very well. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, likewise. It's good to talk to you again. Remind me, where are you located again? Are you in, I'm thinking Texas, but I can't remember.
We're back in Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got back from there. I was there this weekend, so I had some nice barbecue, Terry Black's, for the first time I got to try a little bit of Franklin stuff. There's a restaurant called, I guess, Loro that exports some of his stuff in there. So quite good brisket, so I have to say. So I am jealous that you get that stuff potentially every day if you want it. So.
You got sucked back into the brisket vortex. That stuff is hard to get your hands on sometimes.
Is it really? Yeah. Awesome. Anyway, well, it's welcome to have you here. Abel, for those that don't know, you've been doing this stuff for many years. I know you've been focused on diet, nutrition, and just being healthier. And I know a lot of things. So this, if you don't mind, maybe a synopsis of some of the stuff you've been involved with over the last several years and what you're up to lately.
Sure. So I've been, my main sport growing up that I always loved was running, especially out in nature. So mostly trail running and cross country and that sort of thing, which led me earlier in my life to read the carb loading loving magazines and websites that are all about just sucking on goo packs and that sort of thing. So I went down that rabbit hole for a while, but my health started to fall apart in my 20s. And it wasn't until I realized that I was overweight, my biomarkers were completely out of whack, that I might be doing something wrong, because I was trying to follow that advice so well that it was having much more negative impacts on my life and my performance athletically than it was in the people around me who weren't focused so hard on trying to do the wrong things, if that makes sense. So I was drinking lots of OJ and making sure I didn't eat any dietary cholesterol on purpose, eating lots of whole grains, yada, yada. And that eventually led me down the path of doing some experimentation, bumping up the protein in particular and a lot of the meats, not being afraid of red meats anymore. Once I did that, I was able to shed a lot of the excess weight, which obviously is bad for running, bad for your health in my 20s. And then there was really no looking back. I started writing about it at first with I had my own blog and a few other blogs that eventually turned into a podcast, which has been going for 11 plus years now, which blows my mind. And through that podcast, I originally started interviewing people who had lost 100 pounds and kept it off for a significant period of time, hopefully over 5 years or so. And I asked them how they did it. And so for the past decade and change, I've just been surprised by all of the different ways that have popped up to achieve health. But also, now that I've been doing it for long enough, I'm able to check back in with people, see how they're doing. And the answer is some things seem to work a lot better long-term than others. But as time ticks by, I find myself closer and closer to your way of thinking, which is that if you want to fuel, then meat, and in particular ruminant animals and red meats, is a great option if you're looking to get most of your calories from there, especially if you're a fan of brisket, as we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, brisket is just, particularly done the Central Texas way, is otherworldly. I guess the podcast, correct me on the Fat Burning Man, and I remember seeing it about 10 years ago was when I remember first seeing your name. And then you were on, I can't remember the TV show. I know it was like a reality contest where it was you versus some other method. And you took a guy that was hugely obese and just said, hey, we're not going to go crazy. We're just going to change your diet a little bit and not really. I mean, how did that evolve for you, that little TV show? I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it was called My Diet is Better Than Yours. It was on ABC in 2016. And so the way that show was set up was similar to a weight loss competition like Biggest Loser, but the difference was it wasn't just one way of going about this, just putting everyone on a treadmill and kind of starving them out. There were 5 coaches at any given time on that show at any given week. And the coaches could be eliminated if the people being coached by them didn't like their approach or they weren't getting results. And when we first started, there was one coach who was doing vegan, another one who was focused on more salads and chicken. And we were dubbed the meat eating group, which actually does closely align with kind of my way of going about things. Typically, you wouldn't think that eating hamburgers and crushing brisket and things like that would allow you to have fantastic results in something like a weight loss or a fitness competition. But over the course of, what was it, about 3.5 months, the man who I was coaching, named Kurt, awesome guy, started at 352 pounds with 4 pages of medical issues and all sorts of past histories of injuries that would prevent certain ways of working out that we otherwise would have done. But over the course of 3.5 months, we went from 352 down to, he lost 87 pounds. And I trained him up to run a half marathon. Most of that was through walking, incorporating intermittent fasting most mornings, and then eating until he wasn't hungry anymore. And most of that food came from red meat, but also not just ruminant animals. And we did eat some amount of veggies as well, but we weren't going heavy on salads and that sort of thing. Most of it was cooked at a much smaller quantity and volume than the meats that we were eating. And so, yeah, the whole show had us dress up in red, and we were definitely dubbed kind of the meat eaters of the group. And then we just trounced the competition for the first few weeks, especially. And everyone, including the producers, seemed very befuddled by that, because they expected our team, I think, to really not do well. But we wound up doing exceptionally well. Kurt, especially in the fitness competitions, he dug deep and turned into a beast. And it was interesting watching the years tick off. Like it looked like 10 years came off of him in those 4 months about that we were doing this competition. And we're friends till this day. If you follow people over the course of the many years after they do a super intensive dietary intervention, that's where you can really see if it's working or not. And for him, he has in no way approached the 352 pound range. And a lot of people, unfortunately, once they go on a competition like Biggest Loser, they don't just go back to where they were before in terms of body composition. They go far beyond that and keep packing the weight on, because if you destroy your metabolism, it's a lot more difficult to keep the exercise up, and you just can't starve yourself forever. It is important to eat high quality protein as well as high quality meats, in my opinion.
Back in 2016, what got you to decide, hey, I'm going to eat a lot of meat and stuff like that? Because that was way back then, that was really considered fringe. And even today, I've been harping on this stuff for almost close to a decade now. But still, many people think it's strange. But back in 2016, when really strange. How did you decide that was the route you wanted to go? Was it personal experience, or how did you figure that out?
Yeah, I've been involved in the ancestral health community since 2010, 2011, 2012, somewhere in that ballpark. And Austin, Texas was a huge nexus, and still is in a lot of ways, for that style of eating. But I think it's some combination of the culture of Austin that really sucked me in. Being from the Northeast, I was used to being a type A, listening to all of the well-meaning doctors, or not well-meaning in some cases, but the well-meaning doctors who were telling me to eat a certain way and avoid that dietary cholesterol. But it was really with my own experimentation, trying to get a hold of body composition early in the 2010s, where I realized that eating protein and meat and bone broth, I was big into eating nose to tail, and especially the broths, the collagen protein, seemed to give me a boost that I didn't have before. And all of a sudden I had a lot more mental clarity. Back then, there was some talk about keto, but the whole meat-based thing was not integrated into that. And there was a lot of fear around eating red meat at all, let alone being the majority of your caloric intake. And so for me, I just decided not to be afraid of it. A lot of doctors previously to that had told me that my heart would stop, my triglycerides would keep going up. These were the biomarkers that were out of whack before. My triglycerides, especially my thyroid, was having some issues. And so it was doing something different than what I was told to do by my doctor back then, getting better results, realizing that maybe that hadn't been the answer and it's worth doing some experimentation. And so it was really that N=1, and combined with the culture of the most delicious red meat I had ever had in my entire life, just by virtue of being in Texas, that I'm just like, hey, maybe there's something to this. And if my body composition is in line, if my biomarkers are getting better, then why the heck would I ever go back to trying to do the things that didn't work? But to your point, I've seen you take more than a few hits as well, just for kind of saying that maybe we shouldn't be afraid of all these things, and we should follow not necessarily just intuitive eating, but looking at the foods that taste really good, that give us great results, fill us up, and make sure that we're not going after all of these horrible grain options. Like corn is in everything. A lot of these oils that are used in most, even fancy restaurants now, are completely toxic. So avoiding most newfangled modern foods, combined with sourcing the majority of calories from good old fashioned meat proteins, seem to work wonders. And I'm not 100% carnivore, and I've never gone 100% in that direction, but I think it's a fascinating way of going about healing for a lot of people. And it's certainly something that I've considered.
Yeah. Just back to the deal with my diet is better than yours with Kurt. And it was remarkable that among the contestants, he lost, I guess, the most body fat, even though the weight loss was maybe because when you're losing weight, and there's a lot of ways to lose weight. Anybody will say, my diet, I can lose weight on this or that, and that's true. But retention of lean mass is so critically important, and it's also important to know that he maintained more muscle mass. Was that what you guys found?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the points of contention on the TV show itself, because most people want to see a strict weight loss number. And since people are of different sizes, like Kurt, for example, was the tallest person in the competition, the largest person in the competition. And the person who they ultimately gave the number one title as winner, I think Kurt got runner up in the competition. The number one person, if you look at the numbers, lost the most. What was it? It was like body weight by volume or something like that. The calculation accounted for, gave you extra points for losing more muscle. So if you starve yourself and you keep running endlessly, that can be a good way to lose, I guess, just weight in the short term. But if you're taking away your muscle mass, then long term, that's destroying your metabolism, at least temporarily, maybe even permanently for some people. So with Kurt, the way that we approached it is he was 47 years old and very much not in a healthy spot. And so I said, let's make you strong. Let's get this, especially the belly fat and the visceral fat, off as quickly as possible. And let's make sure that you're feeling good and strong throughout this whole competition, because the fitness competition was a big part of it. And let's not sacrifice, even if it would make the numbers tick off faster, let's not sacrifice your muscle mass. Let's try to preserve as much of that as we possibly can. The way that we did that is by having some amount of weight training a few times a week, nothing insane, but basically just some heavy lifting to tell your muscles to stay there. Because if you're just exercising nonstop, like I said before, and under eating for too long, then you're sacrificing your muscle mass. That may be good for what the numbers on the scale, but it's not good for you. So I was very happy to have the podcast in long form to discuss that in parallel to the TV show that was going on, because we could have deeper conversations about the implications of what all of this means. And to this day, I am not a huge fan of the scale. It can be a useful metric in some ways, but what's more important is your body fat composition and your muscle mass, and retaining that as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, amen to that. I've got a little cheat sheet on you, Abel, if you don't mind. There are various topics that I think you've delved into over the years. And while I certainly will eat infrequently, I certainly don't eat the 6 meals a day or 3 meals and 3 snack periods, which the average American is eating continuously from 7 a.m. to basically 10 p.m. You've played with intermittent fasting, one meal a day for, I guess, a long period of time. Is this something you still do? And what kind of benefits or lack of benefits have you seen from that? I know people say, oh, it doesn't really matter as long as you cut your calories, but do you feel that's the case, or are there some additional thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a really important question because there are so many ways to go about this. And I don't want to say that it's necessary for anybody out there, but as a tool, intermittent fasting became very useful for me. And I think combining that with making sure that I was hitting my protein numbers and also not underfueling. For me, when I started not eating breakfast, I noticed that my hunger was much more in check for the rest of the day, as long as I didn't undereat calories for that day. So I did the kind of 20-4 style of eating for the majority of the past 10, 11, maybe even 12 years. But I started that out with more of a 16-8 or maybe an 18-6 style fast, where I would push out breakfast to be at 12 noon or maybe 2 p.m. And then I would eat until dinner time. And for me, I realized that I really didn't start getting hungry until I started eating. And later on, I got into wearing continuous glucose monitors, looking at my numbers and seeing why that might be the case. Yes, to this day, I tend to eat for about half the day at most, and I'm not super strict about it. Like if we're on vacation or something like that, or we're going to go on a big hike, or there's a huge expenditure of energy, I have no problem eating earlier in the day or eating more meals. One thing that I have learned definitely is that it's important. Overfueling is a problem. Underfueling is definitely a problem too. If you want to keep your metabolism in check, your hormones optimized, and have some level of athletic performance. So intermittent fasting is definitely a useful tool, and I would encourage most people to at least try it. Try pushing out breakfast or having your last meal of the day be lunch some days, for example, or even doing something that's more like a 24-hour or even a 3-day fast. But it is not the only answer, and it could definitely get away from you. And so you need to be careful. You need to be honest about the process as well, because a lot of people go out there saying that it's the only way to do things and it's the only reason that what you're doing is working. But I think if you're doing something that eliminates a lot of the more problematic foods from the diet and nutrition in general, like going carnivore, then it's probably less necessary. And it's more important to make sure that you're not over or under fueling. And so as long as you're hitting your macros, I think that's really what's most important. But also there's some level of adapting to a lack of food for a few hours that I think most people should be able to withstand. And many people will be better off for it. But for women in particular, fasting can get away from you. It's not great for kids. There are a lot of people it's not great for. But for me as a dude, it seemed to be a useful tool to make sure I'm not shackled to making sure I'm eating 3 to 6 plus meals every single day.
Yeah, and I think a couple points: making sure you're getting adequate calories for the day, making sure you're hitting your protein requirement, and just for sake of clarity, what do you consider adequate protein? Obviously, there's caveats on how much your weight training and how active you are, but what are your general thoughts around protein?
Somewhere around a pound per body weight, especially if you're exercising. I'm not afraid of going a little bit above that or a little bit depending on the day. I think it's probably good to cycle protein in and out sometimes, but somewhere thereabouts, 75 grams of protein plus up to somewhere around 1 pound per body weight.
1 gram per pound of body weight.
1 gram per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. And then this is thing, because a lot of people are critical of intermittent fasting. And I think they put the straw man argument that people are saying it's the only way that you can lose weight, which I don't think that many people actually say that, but it is a tool. And it's like anything that gets away from the standard eat a balanced diet of a little bit of junk food, slight caloric deficit, that should be what everybody does. And anybody that deviates from that is a heretic type of thing. When there's all these tools that work for different people, whether it's carnivore or intermittent fasting or even vegan diets, I'm just like, hey, it's a tool. Let people use it. And if it works for them, you should be celebrating rather than demonizing, which we have a lot of that. There's a whole diet war culture, which is a shame.
It's gotten worse too.
Yeah, of course. And now it's become linked to politics, which is just hilarious. Yep. But it's sad. But at the same time, I'm glad there's more people that are sticking up for red meat. From my side of the aisle, talk a little bit about light, because I know you again, whether it's sunlight out in nature, which obviously My crazy hypothesis is humans evolved with sunlight. And
Yeah.
we didn't live in a cave or hide from the sunlight our whole lives. And then there's also been modern like hacks, infrared, near infrared, red light therapy, things like that. What are your thoughts around those things?
Yeah, I've been using near infrared and infrared light for many years now. I don't know, 6, 7+ years, and all sorts of different devices. And at first I was very skeptical. I'm just like, wait a minute. So I stand in front of this giant panel, just the lights hit my skin, and all of a sudden my inflammation goes down and my skin is supposed to get better, yada, yada. Recovery is faster. Yeah, let's see. And after combining that sort of recovery and spending, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes in front of a panel, I did notice that I was recovering a bit better. I've, like you, been a big fan of going out and getting sun pretty much every day that I can for the past decade. So I try to start the day, make that the sunlight, even if it's an overcast day here today, but going outside, making sure that your skin and your eyes get exposure to the messages from the sun. Let's say it's daytime, is very important around the time that you wake up, and it helps reinforce good sleep patterns later in the day. But if you look at the way that most people are living their lives on their phones, on their computers, in artificial light, deep into the night, obviously a lot of our circadian rhythm becomes way out of whack. And so one of the things that's neat about infrared and red light is that you don't have to get all of the intensity of the sun. It's not like going out at 12 o'clock with full sunshine. What red light feels like are the lower wavelengths, a more relaxed atmosphere. And if the sun isn't out at the time that you're using it, if it's early in the morning or if it's later in the evening, it doesn't seem to disrupt our circadian rhythm to the same extent that these artificial lights might, that are more in a blue wavelengths. As a general lifestyle factor, especially in the winter with a lot of people who I've coached, I'm originally from the Northeast, and we had a hard time during the winter, got very pale, started to feel quite sick. And if you don't get enough sunshine, if you don't get enough light in general, sometimes things can go out of whack. So with a lot of people I've worked with up north in particular during the winter, red light has become a very useful tool for mood, for recovery, hopefully for lowering inflammation and things like that. And then specifically, if you do have an injury or your knee is nagging you a little bit or something like that, I've found that some of these newer red light devices that will pulse different wavelengths, not always just one steady wavelengths, but they'll pulse them in and out. It can be really useful for helping some of the pain and helping to recover a bit quicker as well.
Yeah, interesting stuff on that. You'd mentioned you kind of alluded to the fact that you were playing with a CGM. There's a lot of people that are this pro CGM. It's going to be the greatest thing. It'll revolutionize how we think about diet. And then there's other people say there's no business people using that if they don't have diabetes, because
sure,
lead to disordered eating patterns. What are your thoughts on the utility? Because I assume you're not diabetic, but what are your thoughts on the utility or potential problems with that particular device?
I'm not diabetic, and for me, using the CGM, it's probably one of the most powerful tools I've used over the past 10+ years to really see what different foods as well as different activities will do to my blood sugar over time. And it was actually wearing the CGM that showed me how important it was not to underfuel. And I had been underfueling without realizing it in a few occasions. But also it showed me that if I'm going out and doing a big expenditure of energy, sprints, or a long run or something like that, very activity seems to spike my blood glucose more than almost any foods, even some of the worst offenders. But it showed me as well just how bad, for example, fries are. You go out and you get a hamburger. We don't tend to eat the buns. But for the sake of science, I will experiment, especially while wearing a CGM, with other little things. And having just one small free serving of fries that they give you with a burger completely destroyed my blood sugar numbers for the rest of the day. And I didn't seem to recover. Giant spike, giant crash. I got jittery. And this was just like a handful. I couldn't believe what a small amount of fried potatoes did to my metabolism. So I don't know if people want to say that it should be reserved for diabetics. I guess I can understand that. But at this point, it's not something that we're not taking it away from other people by using it ourselves on our own bodies to see what's going on. So I think if people are on the fence about what different foods do to them in particular, which foods are good or bad in particular, then wearing a CGM, you can't hide from it anymore. Does that lead to disordered eating? I don't know. I think it actually helped me because for the various months, I've done this over a few different years. I'll dip in and I'll wear the CGM for about a month and I'll track all my food that I'm eating and experiment with how I feel, track that as well, see how my athletic performance fares as well. And your blood sugar is such an important part of how you feel and perform. Everyone should have a good idea of what's going on there at some point. You don't have to wear it forever, but I would encourage anyone who's curious about which foods are working for them, especially if you are still eating a bunch of plant foods, to experiment with that. It's not terribly expensive, and it'll give you a heck of a lot of data around what you should not be eating. So for me, it makes it easier to eat meat afterwards because that was one of the foods that was very much benign. I could tell that I was feeling better. Obviously, I'm adding to my caloric load. I'm filling up. I'm getting a good source of protein, and my blood sugar is staying nice and constant. If I'm hitting carbs and sugar, yes, I can get away with some of them, but the wrong form of those carbs, especially fried starches, seem to set me off, not just for that day, but even the next day, my blood sugar would be wobbling. So if anything, I think it's encouraged a healthier way of eating for me. And I think for a lot of people who have experimented with that, they've learned some lessons that way too.
Yeah, it's interesting because most people say, I mean, I don't need a CGM to tell me that chocolate cake is going to give me my blood glucose spike. I think most people that have any insight are already going to know that. So it's not surprising, but you're saying starch in particular was problematic for you. And it's also interesting to note that it's not just a 45 minutes and done. You do have this sort of glucose lability that may last for a day or so. And so when we often see a lot of people, and this is a segue from this, but a lot of people will have mood fluctuations tied to energy. And so some people will wonder why we always talk about kids, when you feed them a bunch of sugar, they're bouncing off the walls and they crash and they're grouchy but the same thing happens to us. And so when we have this very unstable energy supply, it's naive to think that our brain and therefore our mood and things like that are not affected by that. And did you see, you mentioned exercise, and I've worn a CGM. I see the same thing. When I'm out there getting after it in the gym and doing heavy deadlifts and sprinting, my blood glucose rises pretty significantly. And I can't think that's a bad thing. There's people out there, I get people to tell me, you shouldn't be doing that stuff anyway because it's not good for you. And I'm like, you're too old for that. No, that's not the attitude I have, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe doing all the strength training and training hard is bad, and I should just settle down and become sarcopenic like everybody else. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, what other insights other than food, have you noticed anything tied to the glucose, like mood or quality of sleep or exercise capacity? Because do you find your performance is better at a certain glucose range, things like that?
Yeah, and I've noticed that it's quite like a hangover. If you have a bunch of carbs and then you crash, I feel similarly as to if I've had too much wine the night before, or if I tied one on or something like that. And if you look at the CGM and combine it with Oura Ring and some of the other things that I used to look at, it can be startling. You can't hide from it, especially my heart rate seems to change. And my heart rate variability will take a hit if I'm eating sugar or if I'm drinking alcohol. And so it showed me in no uncertain terms the similarities between those two. I guess one of them is a nutrient, the other one might be a toxin. Maybe they're both toxins depending on how you look at it. But moderating is also something that can work for people. So I did find that while eating a small amount of the worst kind of fried potatoes, for example, that will set me off and has very poor results for me. Eating slow cooked starches had a different result, and different forms of starches and that sort of thing has a different result. But it's what I notice is when you take that hit or you eat that food that is suboptimal to you, you're not sleeping as well, your heart rate is off, your performance is worse. And so why have food get in the way in that way, in that manner? It's like, why wouldn't you focus on getting the majority of your calories from something that's more benign to your blood sugar and is not going to affect your heart rate in a negative way? That's one of the things that really helps me focus more on making sure that I'm hitting the eggs, getting my protein, not being afraid of red meat. And if you do eat some other foods that, like, I'll eat oats from time to time if I want to get a bit more glycogen going on. I'll eat some other starches. And if I eat a heck of a lot of them, then it can be the glycemic load problem, where you have this bolus of all of these starches and sugars that you need to work through. That will negatively affect my sleep if I have too much all at once. Having a little bit, though, seemed not to be a giant problem. So it showed me that moderating certain things can be very helpful. Having 1 or 2 beers or 1 or 2 glasses of wine is a fundamentally different thing than having 4, 5, or 6 over the course of an evening. Even if you never get inebriated from something like that, the effects on your blood sugar the next day are pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the analogy of a hangover, because, and I rarely ever deviate from this diet. And I've had a piece of birthday cake with my kid's birthday, and I felt, and I remember back when I was on a ketogenic diet, when I would occasionally eat a decent amount of carbs, I did feel like I was hungover. Literally, it just felt very similar. And it's been interesting. Maybe it's because you just don't have the tolerance to that. And if you're eating it all the time, then you don't feel that way. But when you're restricting carbohydrates, and particularly some of these sugary processed foods, then having them seems to be extra problematic for you. I saw something about importance of music in health, and can you maybe touch on that? Because I know maybe you play an instrument of some sort. I vaguely remember something about that, but talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I've been a musician for more than 25 years now, playing guitar and singing mostly, but a bunch of different instruments, and even learned how to play piano as an adult. And one of the reasons that I've been doing this and maintaining a practice of music for about an hour plus a day for multiple decades now is because it does the opposite of what a phone does to us. It does the opposite of what the modern internet and notifications and constant distractions do to us. It's very good for our brains and our bodies, our nervous system, our lives in general, to have something that we're doing that allows us to get into flow, that allows us to be not distracted and just in our own little world. One of the things that I really like about music in particular is, I think of it as being close in some ways to running a sprint, doing big lifts. It takes all of your mental focus and all of your energy. And if it doesn't, you're going to run into some pretty big problems. In music, the problems aren't as intense than messing up a giant lift or falling while you're sprinting, but the song is ruined. If you lose focus for just a split second, then the timing is gone, your rhythm is off. And so what it's doing is it's calibrating the brain and nervous system for people to channel your focus into very precise movements and rhythmic movements. And if you allow your body to do that on a regular basis, I think that's exceptionally good for our bodies and our minds. And there's a lot of research. My first book was largely about this. And so for most people who are on their phones, I think we've normalized this lack of attention, because that's the currency of the internet now. Is everything on the internet, every app and every notification and all these websites, people trying to sell you things, whatever it is, they're trying to steal your attention. And once it's stolen, you don't get it back right away. You might not even get it back for the rest of the day. You're in this reaction mode, this constantly trying to respond to things that are insignificant scrambles our brains, makes us more distracted. And so it doesn't have to be music, but music is a very useful tool for a lot of people and a fun pastime to make sure that you're not completely losing your mind in the modern world, because it's, to some extent, I think, counteracting all of the dangerous aspects of modern technology that are really just stealing our attention at every possible moment that they can. So for people who have an athletic practice, I would hope that they would consider as well at some point down the road looking into music, whether it's just playing a drum. It doesn't have to, you don't have to be the next rock star or something. But I think for humans, if you're missing out on music or you're missing out on dance, you're missing out on part of the human experience. And I don't want all just to be handed to AI from now on, because it's already taking over in a lot of the arts. And it's on us to continuously become more creative and use our uniquely human traits to bring something to the world. And maybe computers can do it better, and maybe they will do it better than us, but that's not the point. This is fine-tuning your nervous system is the way that I like to look at it. And many people would be well served by taking on that next new little artistic hobby, I think.
Yeah, I'm often jealous, and I unfortunately never developed any kind of musical talents, but all my kids, three of my four kids are rigorously learning piano, and they're
awesome.
The basic instrument, and so they're into that. And in the beginning, they really didn't like it, and now they're starting to get into it as they've been doing it for a couple of years now. But
it's a bit.
But I've looked a little bit into this. There's some research out there looking at listening to music and how it affects us in many ways. One was interesting on how it affects appetite, and certain restaurants are keyed into it. And there's a different type of music and cadence and volume of music that drives eating behaviors. And so it's really fascinating. Have you looked into how listening to music affects us in various ways?
Absolutely. Yeah. It can affect shopping behaviors. There's this back in the 80s, there's Muzak and kind of this schmaltzy, pre-programmed type stuff that what music does is it regulates our arousal. And so if you're looking at shopping behavior or what you're doing on the internet, music can control your physiology that way. And we want to, or our nervous systems want to entrain to whatever beat that we're hearing. At the same time, music is not fundamentally different than reciting a mantra, in my mind anyways. And if you look back at various religions over the course of time, obviously that's a big part of how we channel spirit or meaning as humans. And that can be used against us as well. So there's a lot of subconscious programming that can be happening in music that we may or may not be aware of. But the most important thing for people, if they're looking to improve their lives by listening to music, is choosing something that resonates with you, that you like listening to. And if you listen while you're exercising, for example, safely, right? You want to make sure that you're also aware of your surroundings and all of that. But there is a boost that's been noted in athletics for people who are listening to music that they enjoy, that also helps them align with a certain cadence. So for runners in particular, it can help make sure if their feet are hitting with each beat of particular songs that they're listening to, that can encourage good exercise behavior. And it can also make it a little bit more fun, or it can reduce the amount of hurt that you're experiencing from that exercise for certain exercises. So there is a lot of work around this, and a lot more work than there was probably 10 years ago. And so I'm excited by a lot of the stuff that's coming out. But also the modern state of music is one that I don't want to sound like a cranky old man shouting at the sky, but it is important to focus on, especially with kids. Some people refer to it as high information music. So listening to old classical tunes or jazz, for example, without lyrics, these can challenge our brains to try to understand what's going on. Whereas in the past 5 years, pretty much most of the top 20 songs on Spotify have had almost the exact same rhythm, the exact same beat, without much melody and that sort of thing. So if you are trying to find music that's going to enrich your life, then it's important to sprinkle in some amount of high information music in there too. Even if you don't like it at first, it's doing something to you, and most of those things are good.
Yeah, I find, like, with my own personal experience, I love listening to music. And every time I'm training, I'm usually training at home in my garage, and I crank up the music. And there's different music for when I'm deadlifting versus when I'm running. It's just different different levels of arousal that work for me, and it's very much an important aspect of that. What I guess is kind of, and I don't know if you've delved into this, but when it comes to the success of getting healthier and losing weight, if that's part of that journey. How much, because we talk about do this diet, do that, go walk, go do this stuff, but there's a certain psychology that is often either not addressed or overlooked, or people don't know how to deal with that. Do you think about that much?
Yeah, absolutely. You inspire me just by demonstrating discipline. with your workouts, showing up for the workouts, eating a particular way, sticking to it. I think that's one of the most, that thing is missing from a lot of the messaging that people give, where they say this will work for you because you're only eating X, or you're not eating Y, or you're doing this exercise, or you're using this gizmo, or you're taking this supplement. Whereas it's much more of a holistic approach. And the people who I've seen succeed over time are the ones who are able to experiment, find what works for them, and then have the discipline to stick to it for the long term. And also admit if things are out of whack or if something has changed, to not be afraid to also adapt that approach, but then be disciplined to that approach. My problem way back that we started with when you first started this interview was that I was disciplined in sticking to the wrong way of doing things that was making me fat and sick. So you want to make sure that you don't do that, hopefully. Or if you do, you're able to look at your results or lack thereof and then make some adjustments and adaptations so that you can show up with the discipline to mostly, I think what a lot of this hinges on is having some sort of physical activity in your life. And for everyone, it's going to be a little bit different. But if you don't have that matched up with the diet that you're using or that you're participating in or that you're subscribed to, whatever, if those two things don't match up, then it's going to get ugly or it's going to run away from you. So it's very important to look at your life holistically and commit to the actual changes that you need to make in your life, which mostly means, I think for a lot of people, that means just getting out and moving and hopefully lifting something heavy for the rest of their lives on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'm always preaching the benefits of lean mass and strength training. I think that is one of the things that I just don't think you can say enough about that, because irrespective of the dietary strategy you pursue, whether it's plant-based, meat-based, or something in between, I think the biggest differentiator as I look at people aging are those that engage in regular exercise, particularly strength-based training, versus those that don't. And I think clearly obesity is a huge issue. There's no doubt about it. We see that. But I think equally and often underlooked is this concept of frailty and sarcopenia. And you see, because when you look at old women, the classic old woman is a frail, thin person and that's so common. That's part of aging. And my mindset is the longer I can stave that off, the longer I can hang on to lean mass and presumably good function with that, the less likely I am to die. Now, I may be wrong about that. Obviously, there's other things that can happen, but I think that's a pretty good way of looking at things. And I think things that sort of send you that way, high quality protein, resistance training, and then the lack of sedentary behavior, because again, the obesity side of it is still important too. And I think in my view, because I talk to people, and the first thing I try to get people to convince people is don't be sedentary. Before you start worrying about going to the gym and deadlifting and sprinting and all that stuff, just get away from the sedentary behavior, because that is incredibly important. And you said just move. And you live in Austin, Texas. Most of the year the weather's pretty good. You're in a good place. There's all kinds of outdoor resources. I love going to Austin. It's such a fun place to be, and it's a very walkable place. And but what are your thoughts around just activity in general?
Everyone should be walking a lot, hopefully a couple times a day. Yeah. It doesn't have to be some sort of marathon type walking adventure, 60, 90 minutes, 2 hours. That's great too. But just breaking up your day and making sure that you're getting outside, getting fresh air, getting that sunlight exposure is so important. So if you don't have a dog, pretend that you do, and get out in the morning, get out in the middle of the day, get out in the evening, and try to have that be a part of your life that doesn't seem like work. Because maybe you don't want to lace up your shoes and get out there, but you'll never regret it. You'll never regret walking for 5 to 10 minutes. It is a altered state even. It'll be a state change for you. If you've been staring at your computer for hours and hours, then there's almost nothing better than that you could possibly do than go outside for a quick walk. As much as I love running, I think for most people, walking is a much better option. It's much more achievable. And also you don't have to have this kind of inconvenience factor of, if you are doing those big heavy lifts or you're doing the sprints, you're dripping with sweat. You've got pit stains. People don't want that in the middle of the working day. I don't either. And so it's important to know that we can move without having to like go get changed and take a shower and do all this stuff. No, you might be like sweating bullets walking outside in Austin in the middle of the summer, but nobody cares. Everyone else is sweating as well. That's actually one of the things that I love about Austin in particular. I think physical activity is huge here and also encouraged in a different way, where it doesn't have to be this 1 or 0 thing where you're an exerciser or not an exerciser. And if you look at the cultures over time and the people over time who have done really well with health, sometimes in spite of what they're eating, it's because they're walking all the time. They're walking to go get their groceries in Europe, and they're walking to work sometimes. And so if you don't have that as part of your lifestyle, then try to work it in there in whatever way you can. But I would say walking is huge. Doing some sort of strength training eventually. It doesn't have to be anything massive, but just telling your muscles to stay there and to not go away is very important messaging. And then on top of that, depending on your age and where you're at, trying to approach VO2 max or have some sort of sprinting type workout, I think is really important for feeling and staying young. And then, of course, you can't forget, and I always love to forget about this and not do it myself, but mobility is so important, especially if you're looking at longevity and not getting injured. You've got to make sure that if you are running or you're doing those lifts, that you're not doing it all cattywampus and wonky, and that you're not going to blow out a knee or hurt your back. It's really important to stay honest about that. Some level of also self-massage or mobility or working out the kinks is really important too.
Yeah, man, on the walking. I just got back from Portugal last week. Spent a week there, and everybody's walking. And we don't see there's some obesity, but it's not. I said there wasn't the quote unquote the American style of obesity, because you just don't see the super morbid obese people walking around. There's some people that have a little bit of bellies, and as like everywhere, the diet quality generally across the world is getting worse. But they're walking. There's old ancient cities where it's fun to walk around. You just see all these things from 500,000 years ago, which is really neat to see. Yeah. And it is such good advice. And I don't consider that, I don't really consider it exercise. I just think I consider it activity. And just like you said, you don't have to go out and get sweaty and stuff like that. That's for a different time. And, I think those things are good as well. Do you, obviously there is, and guys like Mark Sisson have talked about the downsides of just going crazy and running. Do you subscribe to the fact that you can over-exercise? How common do you think that is?
Oh yeah, it's a big problem, because it's easy to get addicted to the physiological factors, the endorphins, and also addicted to what your watch is telling you about your times. And so if you go so far as to be doing a bunch of triathlons or running marathons, like I got into running marathons about 12 years ago and realized from a body composition perspective, I did a lot better with shorter distance, like 10K, 5K, and more sprint type races. My body will hold on to more body fat and less muscle the more that I'm running. And so one of the reasons that I run to this day and always have is for my mind. It's a moving meditation. It's a way to get away from everything, get away from all the notifications, clear your head, and really feel alive. I feel most alive when I'm moving my body and I'm covered with sweat, and it's some sort of adventure. But I think hiking is also a great option for a lot of people, and you don't have to go crazy with chasing fast times. I've seen a lot of people and a lot of friends in my life, peers who I used to run with, who cannot run anymore, even though they're in their 30s. Like they need a new hip, or their knee is bad now. And I don't want to ever be there. So it's important to make sure that you're not over exercising, that you are working on yourself. And you can catch that bug. I've seen a lot of people catch that bug where you're exercising almost to death, and that can really strain your heart. It can strain your joints. And it's important to recognize why you're doing all of this. It's to meet a short-term PR. And I remember when I finished my first marathon, I felt like I could conquer the world after that, at least after I recovered. And it did give some sort of motivation that made other things easy because it was such a sufferfest to get through it, and I got through it. But if you stay there and you keep going in that direction, your body will eventually suffer too if you don't really pay attention and focus, like I said, on the mobility and the massage and making sure that all of your joints are moving the way that they should and that you're symmetrical. That's a lot more work than it sounds like, especially as the years tick by. So absolutely, people can over exercise. And in a lot of cases, you'd be surprised by how great the results can be by actually not devoting that many minutes or hours a week to exercise. It's more a matter of getting in there, doing, I'd say, 1 sprint workout a week, 1 or 2 strength workouts a week, plenty of walking, and then maybe some other little fun workout or some activity that's encouraging you to move through different body positions, getting down into a deep squat, bending over, hip hinging, pushing, pulling, all of these things you want to be able to continue to do throughout your life, because once you stop doing them, you lose the ability to get in that position, and then you could eventually get injured.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. And I think if we look at the data on strength when it pertains to health and longevity, it's just being in the top tertile. If you're in the top third of humans, if your age group, you're going to have a significant advantage. You don't need to be the world record setter. That's for like weirdos like me that like to compete all the time. But just getting in that top third, and really the top third, unfortunately, is not a very big bar to cross. When you look at the average population, being in the top third in strength for your age is not much where we are today. So that's such an important aspect. And I think like that, like you said, that dosing is, I think, pretty spot on. Sprinting a little bit, do some strength training, and then mostly a lot of just moving, whether it's walking or hiking or light cycling or things like that, depending on what you have. And what about the people that, because, Austin, Texas, I'm in the Seattle area now, and quite honestly, it's not great for walking a lot of times. It's rainy, it's cold, it's in the 30s, and it's raining, and I'll go out there and do it sometimes, but I'd rather not go out in this. So what do those people have to do with that? And then your thoughts on, what are your thoughts on people that live in these cold, dark places, Canada, northern U.S., northern Europe, and things like that? How do they manage these things?
I think you'll probably like this answer. When I was iced in, we lived in Colorado for the past 5 years or so. And obviously I spent many winters up in the Northeast. And I'm not generally a huge fan of treadmills and that kind of exercise, but I got myself a small, inexpensive rowing machine when I was in Colorado when we were iced in, and it would be unsafe or just way too cold, too icy to run, especially on hills and that sort of thing. And so just hitting that nice and light for 20, 30 minutes, maybe a few times a week, really seemed to help my mind and my body and get to that point where you're flushing out the lymph, you're getting your blood flowing. So important. And so, we can use the excuse that, it's too cold or it's too rainy to go out and go for a walk today. But as long as you have the space for it, if there is something that you do enjoy, like an elliptical machine, a bike that you could ride on inside, or any other type of rowing machine or exercise that you could do that get some nice light cardio going, go for it. It's going to serve you, and you don't want to get completely out of shape during the winter. I've made this mistake before where I completely stopped like all running for 6 months or something like that and really didn't use it. So when you try to get back into shape after that and you do your first hill sprints or whatever, gosh, I was in pain. That's when the red light panels really started to be helpful, because I was just rocked for a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, as I tried to get back into working out again. So if you can maintain through the colder months some level of cardiovascular activity inside, or just driving to a gym to do it the old-fashioned way there as well, you can definitely find a way to keep moving and keep sweating through the winter. And I think it's really important that we do. If you take too much time off, that was another big thing that I saw in the CGM experiments. On my rest days, I have very little margin for error. If I eat just a little bit of something that I shouldn't, blood sugar goes right up. On the days that I was exercising, even if it was just kind of something nice and light, even just walking can fundamentally change the way that your glucose responds to different foods. And it's almost always going to be a positive. It's going to be much more of a steady type of blood glucose over the course of the day if you're walking for just a few minutes around mealtime. And so that's something that I have continued to do as soon as I learned that lesson. I think it's really important that other people do as well. And then there's a lot more resistance to people working out again. If you are completely out of shape, it's more work to get back into shape. So try to just maintain that some level of physical activity and athleticism through those rough months, and you'll thank yourself for it later.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that is, you mentioned, because we know exercise makes you more insulin sensitive, either directly while you're doing low intensity walking or the heavy strength training, which can last for 24 hours or more. This is all like common sense stuff. It really is. And you think this is common sense messaging, but why do you think so many people don't do this? Why do we have so many people that are suffering from obesity and chronic disease when clearly these things would mitigate? Why do you think we still have so many people that don't do this? What do you think's going on?
I think it's become common sense, but I remember when I started and when you started, like, eating red meat, what wasn't common sense, right? Like, it wasn't something that we should do on a regular basis. In fact, it seemed like something that was best avoided. I'm grateful that a lot of the conversation, not just around red meats and proteins and some of those other things, a lot of things that didn't used to be so obvious or used to be discouraged are now quite obvious. And so I think it's more the rubber meets the road. How do you turn what we know we should be doing into a habit in your own life? How do you make sure that you show up every week and do the things that we know that we should be doing? And it's very tempting. I think it goes back to what I was saying about the reason that I encourage people to play music is we're so distracted looking for the next big answer, the next big diet, or something that sets us off and say, no, that's not right. We're too busy in front of our screens to focus on planning out our day and making sure that we're sticking to those good old fashioned habits. Because if you walk, you lift heavy, you get out and hit the sunshine and eat reasonably well, then you're going to be healthy pretty much for the rest of your life, aside from things that obviously go wrong here and there and the curveballs that come at us. But I think it's more about planning. It's about discipline. And if you can get ahead of your calendar and make sure you're sticking to the things that you know that you should be sticking to, that's going to be a huge win for a lot of people. And that's one way that I've worked it into my own life and with my own coaching clients, is making sure that your calendar tells you what to do so you don't have to think about it. Because for a lot of people, if they know that they should be walking, they should be doing strength training, they should be doing sprints, so it's just like, I can't do all of this today. And so they don't do any of it. And then the next day comes and it's just like, I should be walking, I should be doing sprints. I know that I should, so I probably just won't. I'll skip over it. So I think this is where programming and discipline really comes in. And sometimes accountability as well. If you find that you know what you should be doing, but you're not doing it, and for a lot of people, working with a coach or some sort of accountability partner becomes really important. Yeah,
they say that if you don't make some time for exercise and good behaviors, then disease is going to take up all your time. Dable, unfortunately, we're coming to an end of our time. Where do people go to find you? This has been wonderful. Thanks for doing this. Website, social media, any of that type of stuff.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The website with the podcast is fatburningman.com. And then for my music and more artistic projects, that's at abeljames.com, ABEL James.com.
Well, Abel, awesome. Thanks for the good advice. Good luck with all you're doing. And maybe next time I'm in Austin, we'll have to hook up. So anyway, thanks so much.
I would love that.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baker.
All right. Take care, guys. We'll see. We got another one of these at 2:00 today. So if anyone wants to show up, we got another one today. Okay. Thanks, Abel. Bye-bye.
Cheers.